The ceiling fan did little more than push hot, damp air around the operations tent. Its blades wobbled on a tired motor, squeaking faintly as they turned. The humidity was suffocating, clinging to every surface, slicking the laminated map spread. Across the briefing table, and coating the SEALs who sat shoulder to shoulder around it, the smell of sweat, oil, and canvas hung heavy in the air. Outside, the jungle was alive with noise-chirping cicadas, distant howls, the steady drone of insects that seemed to grow louder the closer night came. Inside, though, it was silent. Every operator focused on the man at the front of the table. Commander Hayes had the lean build and sharp features of a man who had spent decades in combat zones. His voice carried the clipped authority of someone used to being obeyed. He tapped the end of a pencil against a red-circled ridge on the map. Intelligence has confirmed enemy movement along this sector. They're running supplies, possibly weapons, through these jungle trails. Our task is to confirm, photograph, and record everything we can. No contact unless it becomes unavoidable. This is recon? Clear? Around the table, heads nodded. Every operator knew the drill. Missions like this were routine on paper, but the jungle had a way of making the simplest operations into nightmares. Chief Petty Officer Riley Carter sat a little back from the table, her rifle case leaning against the leg of her chair. Her M40 sniper rifle wasn't just her weapon. It was her lifeline, her edge. She had already broken it down, cleaned it, and reassembled it twice today, not because it needed it, but because she needed it. Running her hands over the familiar steel and composite settled her nerves. For Carter, calm was found in the precision of preparation. At 29, Carter had been through enough operations to know better than to trust a routine briefing. She had been the quiet one in her class, the sniper candidate who excelled at patience, observation, and disappearing into terrain. Most SEALs carried the swagger of warriors. Carter carried the weight of discipline. Her teammates respected her not because she spoke the loudest, but because when she spoke, it mattered. Beside her sat Petty Officer Mike Ramirez, the team's point man, who leaned forward over the table with restless energy. "Looks like thick canopy," he muttered, running a finger along the contour lines. "Visibility's gonna suck." "That's what she's here for," Hayes replied, nodding toward Carter. "Eyes at a distance," Ramirez grinned. "Guess you get to babysit us, Carter." She allowed herself a small smile, but didn't answer. She'd heard every version of that joke before. What mattered wasn't the banter in the tent. It was what happened when the first shot cracked in the jungle. The briefing continued. Hayes laid out the insertion plan. Fast rope from a Black Hawk under cover of darkness. Hike 3 clicks through uneven jungle terrain. Reach the ridge by 0300 hours. Observe until dawn. Then exfil to a secondary landing zone. Simple enough. Too simple, Carter thought. She'd learned to mistrust missions that sounded clean on the surface. She studied the aerial photographs laid across the table. Grainy black and white images of jungle canopy, broken by faint, narrow trails. A few crude structures showed up as smudges of lighter gray. "That one," she said suddenly, tapping a fingertip against a barely visible square clearing. "That's not natural. Could be a supply point." Hayes looked at her, then back to the photo. He didn't argue he knew Carter's eye for detail was better than most. "Noted. We'll pass it up the chain, but stay sharp when we hit ground." The team began asking the practical questions: routes, backup plans, extraction timing. Hayes answered each without hesitation. It was clear this wasn't his first time briefing men into dangerous places. But underneath his calm exterior, even he knew the jungle ahead was unforgiving. As the briefing wrapped, Carter leaned back in her chair, listening as Ramirez cracked a joke about mosquitoes the size of small drones. The others laughed, the tension easing for a moment. Laughter was armor-thin, fragile, but necessary. Carter's gaze drifted to her rifle case. She pictured herself behind the scope, the crosshairs steady, the world narrowing to a single point. In those moments, the chaos of war fell silent. It was just her, the rifle, and the target. That was her sanctuary. But this mission wasn't about pulling the trigger. It was about being unseen, unheard, forgotten ghosts in the jungle who left with nothing more than photographs. Still, Carter knew missions didn't always respect their orders. The enemy had a vote, and so did the terrain. Hayes dismissed them with a curt, "Gear up, wheels up in 20. The tent filled with the sounds of chairs scraping, gear being hoisted, rifles checked and slung. Carter knelt beside her rifle. Case, fingers moving with automatic precision as she unlocked it. The M40 rested inside, gleaming even in the dim light. She lifted it with reverence, running her thumb across the cool barrel before snapping it onto her rucksack. A familiar weight on her shoulders grounded her. Outside, the night was already creeping over the base. The sky was a deep bruise of purple and black, stars faint behind thick clouds. The humid air pressed harder, filled with the smell of fuel from the helipad where their bird waited. As the team moved toward the Black Hawk, Carter lagged a step. Behind, scanning faces, reading the unspoken words in their expressions. Some were confident, others quietly tense. Every operator had their own ritual before stepping into the dark. For Carter, it was silence. She carried no words with her, only her rifle and the steel calm she had built through years of waiting in shadows. When they climbed aboard, the crew chief gave a thumbs up. The engines roared, blades cutting into the night, the noise vibrating in their bones. Inside the cabin, red light bathed their faces, turning them into silhouettes. Carter settled onto the bench, rifle across her lap, eyes locked on the open ramp at the back. Beyond it stretched only blackness, the jungle waiting like a living thing. Ramirez leaned close, his grin still there despite the noise. "Hey, Carter," he shouted over the thrum of the rotors. "Bet you a beer we're back before sunrise." Carter gave him a sidelong glance. "You'll owe me," she said simply. The Black Hawk lifted, the base shrinking below them until it was nothing but scattered lights against an endless sea of green darkness. The mission had begun, and in the back of her mind, Carter felt it the weight of something unseen, like the jungle itself was already watching, waiting to decide whether it would let them leave alive. The Black Hawk cut across the night like a predator, low and fast, hugging the treetops. Its rotors pounded the air with a steady thrum that pressed into the chest of every seal packed tightly in its bay. The interior glowed in dim red light, bathing their faces in shadows. Helmets, NVGs, rucksacks, and weapons all blended into one silhouette of silent, lethal men and women ready to vanish into darkness. Chief Petty Officer Riley Carter sat rigid against the bulkhead, her M40 rifle resting across her knees. She cradled it almost absent-mindedly, her gloved thumb stroking the bolt handle the way others might fiddle with worry beads. Outside the open ramp, the jungle stretched endlessly, a dark ocean of green smothered beneath layers of mist. From above, it looked still, almost serene. Carter knew better. The jungle was never still. It hid things, swallows them, and never gives them back. The pilot's voice crackled over the comms. 2 minutes. Stand by. Around her, the team came alive. Harnesses tightened, gear cinched, weapons checked one last time. Ramirez tapped his chest twice, a silent signal to his point man instincts, then pulled his gloves tighter. Carter fitted her NVGs down, the world snapping into green-tinted clarity. Through them, the jungle was an undulating mass, every tree, vine, and slope magnified with eerie precision. Commander Hayes moved down the line, steady and calm, his presence enough to steady even the jitteriest nerves. He gave Carter a small nod, subtle but deliberate. It was less an order, more an acknowledgement. He knew she would be their eyes in the dark. The Black Hawk slowed, hovering low over a narrow clearing, choked with ferns and tall grass. Rotor wash tore at the vegetation, sending leaves whipping in every direction. The air filled with the sharp sting of disturbed earth and the roar of the blades. Ropes, ropes, ropes! The crew chief barked. Ramirez was the first over, sliding down the fast rope with smooth precision. The others followed in a rhythm drilled into them countless times, hands and boots burning against rope, dropping into the shivering grass, spreading out in disciplined arcs to secure the landing zone. Carter waited her turn, chest steady, lungs pulling in deep, controlled breaths. When she grabbed the rope and dropped, the noise of the helicopter was overwhelming, but her body moved on muscle memory. Gloves smoking slightly from friction. Boots hit the ground with a muted thud. She crouched immediately, rifle up, scanning the jungle's edge through the pale green wash of her NVGs. Nothing. Only the sway of branches in the rotor wash and the endless static hiss of insect wings. Hayes was last down, signaling up. The Black Hawk banked hard, climbing fast, vanishing into the dark. Within seconds, its roar dissolved into distance, leaving the team standing in silence. The silence was staggering. After the chaos of the rotor blades, the jungle seemed to press in closer, as though reclaiming what had briefly been disturbed. Night creatures resumed their chorus, the clicking of frogs, the hiss of cicadas, the occasional guttural cough of something deeper in the undergrowth. "Form up," Hayes whispered, his voice a ghost through their comms. The team moved like shadows, rifles angled out, NVGs sweeping the edges. Carter fell into position near the rear, her role to overwatch. Her eyes never stopped moving, searching for the small anomalies, the unnatural straight lines, the shadow that lingered too long, the glint of metal where there should only be leaves. They moved. The jungle floor was soft, spongy with decades of rotting leaves, sucking at their boots with every step. Vines hung low, grabbing at gear. Branches cracked softly as they were pushed aside. Carter felt the oppressive humidity settle heavier with every minute. Sweat slicked her body under her uniform, stinging her eyes, dampening her gloves. Ramirez led them, compass and GPS guiding through terrain that looked identical in every direction. The jungle had no landmarks, only endless green walls, and a canopy so dense the sky was invisible. Carter scanned constantly, but the monotony had its own edge. The jungle played tricks on the eyes branches that looked like rifles, shadows that resembled crouched figures. Her training drilled one thing into her mind: trust nothing until you prove it false. The minutes stretched into an hour. Then two. The sounds of their movements muted boots, faint clicks of safeties disengaging, the soft brush of fabric on leaves, seemed deafening to Carter's ears. Every sound felt like it carried for miles. They reached a ridgeline around 0200 hours. The incline was brutal, mud sucking at their boots, vines whipping their faces, sweat soaking every inch of their bodies. Carter dug in, using her rifle strap to haul herself up sections too slick to climb otherwise. At the crest, the jungle opened slightly, revealing a faint moonlit canopy stretching out like a living ocean. The air was even thicker here, heavy with the smell of damp earth and something sweetly rotten. Hayes raised a fist, halting the column. They crouched low, every operator scanning. The jungle below was endless shadows. Somewhere in that darkness, their target moved. Carter slid prone, unslinging her M40. She settled the bipod into the dirt, pressed her cheek to the stalk, and peered through her scope. The glass cut through the green blur, sharpening faint shapes into detail. Nothing yet, but she stayed ready. Beside her, Ramirez exhaled. "Feels wrong," he whispered, voice barely audible even over comms. Carter didn't reply, She felt it too. The jungle had moods, and tonight it was restless. The silence between the insect cries seemed longer, heavier, like the air itself was holding its breath. Hayes checked his watch, then gestured them forward. They had to cover another kilometer before their observation post. The mission depended on timing. They descended the ridge slowly, carefully, boots slipping on wet leaves. Carter's ears caught every creak of branches, every distant snap. Each sound drilled into her nerves, but she kept moving, rifle steady, senses on fire. As they reached flatter ground, Carter froze. She crouched, raising a hand. "Hold," Hayes ordered instantly. Carter tilted her head, scanning the ground. In the mud ahead, barely visible under scattered leaves, was a footprint, fresh, larger than a seal boot, and deeper, as if made by someone carrying heavy weight. She touched it with her gloved hand. The edges hadn't filled with water yet. Recent. "Contact signs," she whispered. The team tensed, rifles snapping up, scanning arcs. The jungle whispered around them, the drone of insects suddenly distant. Hayes studied the print, then motioned them forward with increased caution. The insertion was complete. Now came the real danger, moving unseen through a jungle that already had eyes on them. And as Carter rose, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting out there, just beyond the edges of her scope. The jungle closed in tighter as the team pressed deeper into the valley, each step taking them farther from the faint comfort of the ridge line. It was after 0300 hours now, the hour when exhaustion begins to whisper in the bones, when shadows take on shapes and silence turns heavy. The darkness seemed thicker here, the canopy blotting out even the dim glow of starlight above. Their NVGs painted the world in ghostly greens, but even through that amplified haze, Carter felt blind. She moved near the rear of the formation, her M40 snug across her chest. She was not only a sniper tonight, she was the team's sixth sense, the one who caught the things others might miss. Her training had wired her brain differently. While most soldiers scanned for threats, she hunted for anomalies, things that didn't fit, the subtle threads out of place in the tapestry of nature. It was a broken vine at first, a thick creeper snapped clean across its midpoint. Not frayed, not wilted, but freshly broken. Someone had come through here, and recently. She crouched, brushing her gloved fingertips over the fibers. Still damp. Still alive. "Trail's hot," she murmured over comms. Hayes paused, scanning the column, then signaled for silence. No questions, no chatter. The seals simply adjusted, weapons raised a little higher, movements a little slower. They trusted Carter's eyes. Another 20 meters, and she found something else. Mud, compacted with faint ridges where a boot had pressed down. She knelt, studying the impression under her NVG lens. Not their boots' different tread. Larger, wider spacing. Civilian-made? Gorilla? She couldn't be sure, but she knew one thing. It hadn't been there long. The edges were too sharp, unsoftened by moisture or falling leaves. She lifted her hand in a closed fist. The team froze instantly, dropping to knees and bellies. Weapons scanned in every direction, arcs of fire overlapping. Carter kept her breathing slow, controlled, while her eyes swept the jungle. Nothing but ferns, vines, and trees staring back. The night creatures carried on, cicadas buzzed, frogs croaked, but beneath it she felt something unnatural. A silence beneath the noise. Then came the faintest smell. Acrid, sour. Smoke. It was almost nothing. Just a thread woven into the wet heaviness of jungle air. But to Carter's trained senses, it was out of place. Fire did not belong here. The moisture was too high, the foliage too thick. Smoke meant men. Smoke meant camps. Smoke meant enemies. She touched her throat mic. "Hayes, I've got smoke." bearing 180, maybe 100 meters. The commander's hand signal rippled down the line. Hold position. The team crouched low, disappearing into underbrush, waiting for orders. The jungle pressed close, the air thick with anticipation. Carter's heart beat steady, not racing, but alive with tension. Every sound was sharper, every shadow deeper. Hayes crawled close enough for his whisper to reach her ear. Could be a cooking fire. Could be scouts. Carter's reply was simple. It's too close. The commander studied her for a beat, then nodded. He trusted her instincts. Carter hadn't built a reputation on false alarms. He signaled again. Advance, but slow, cautious. The team shifted forward in silence, becoming part of the jungle itself. Every movement was deliberate. They placed boots on solid ground, avoided twigs, kept their silhouettes broken by the terrain. Even the night's natural chorus didn't falter at their passing. They were ghosts. Still, Carter couldn't shake it. Something was wrong. Not the usual danger of hostile ground, something heavier, more deliberate. The footprints, the vine, the smoke, it wasn't coincidence. She felt like someone was leaving breadcrumbs, waiting for them to follow. A branch snapped somewhere ahead. The sound was soft, but to ears strung taut with adrenaline, it was deafening. Carter dropped flat, rifle up, scope cutting through the foliage. Her crosshairs swept across the underbrush, searching for movement. She caught a shadow that shifted against the natural sway of the leaves. Just a fraction of a second, but enough. Someone was there, watching. Eyes on, 10 o'clock. 40 meters, she whispered. The team froze, barrels pivoting toward her callout. But when she blinked, the figure was gone. Nothing but the swaying of branches. Her finger rested lightly on the trigger, but she didn't fire. A sniper's rule: don't pull unless you're certain. Certainty saves lives, doubt destroys them. Still, her gut twisted. They weren't alone. Hayes leaned close again. Pull back or push forward? Carter's eyes stayed fixed on the shadows. She weighed the options. To pull back now meant mission failure, intel lost. To push forward meant walking into something that felt increasingly like a trap. Before she could answer, the night shifted. The jungle, loud with insects, suddenly went silent. It was subtle at first, the croaks of frogs cutting short, the hum of cicadas tapering. Then absolute stillness. A silence so total it rang in their ears. Every seal stiffened. It was the oldest sign in the book. Predators make prey silent. The jungle knew what the seals did not. Carter exhaled slowly, eyes still locked through her scope. We're compromised. Hayes swore under his breath, but his face didn't change. He signaled a change in formation, fanning out, rifles sweeping every angle. The seals pressed forward again, but the air was different, now thicker, heavier, charged like a storm waiting to break. Carter's every sense screamed. She knew what was coming. She just didn't know when. They reached a small clearing, a break in the canopy where moonlight filtered faintly through. Carter crouched low, covering the edges, every muscle coiled. She searched, and then the world exploded. A machine gun tore through the silence, tracers ripping across the clearing. The first bursts shredded a tree trunk, splinters erupting like shrapnel. Seals dove for cover, shouts mixing with the deafening roar of gunfire. Carter's rifle snapped up, crosshairs catching the flash of the gunner's position. One breath, one squeeze, her M40 thundered, and the muzzle flash went dark. But it was only the beginning. The ambush had sprung. The first burst of fire came like lightning, ripping the night apart. A Russian-made PKM machine gun hammered from the tree line, its tracers streaking hot orange across the clearing. The rounds shredded leaves and splintered bark, chewing through branches with brutal efficiency. The SEAL team hit the ground as one, trained instinct overriding shock. Carter rolled into the mud, her M40 snapping to her shoulder in a single fluid motion. The world narrowed to her scope, the chaos shrinking until only the muzzle flash mattered. She slowed her breathing, let the chaos fall away, and squeezed. The crack of her rifle split the night. Through her scope, she saw the gunner jerk backward, his weapon falling silent as he toppled into the undergrowth. But silence didn't return. More flashes ignited the jungle. Bursts from AK-47s, the dull thunk of RPG tubes being fired, the thunder of another machine gun setting up to the left. The clearing erupted into chaos. Explosions ripped through ferns and vines, spraying mud and leaves into the air. Contact left, contact right. Hayes barked over comms. His voice was steady, but Carter could hear the strain behind it. Ramirez was already firing in controlled bursts, muzzle fire illuminating his face in strobe-like flashes. Another SEAL tossed a smoke grenade, white plumes spilling across the clearing, offering at least a shred of cover. Carter stayed prone, steady as bedrock. Her rifle barked again, and another enemy dropped, his body folding into the brush. She shifted, fired again, and caught the glint of another barrel. Another body crumpled. Every shot counted. She was the scalpel in the storm. Still, the volume of enemy fire was staggering. Whoever had planned this ambush knew what they were doing. The SEALs were boxed in, funneled into a choke point with little room to maneuver. The jungle itself became the enemy. Thick vines tangled their movement. Massive trunks offered cover to the insurgents, but limited the team's visibility. A rocket screamed overhead, slamming into the ridge behind them. The shockwave rolled through Carter's body, dirt and leaves raining down. Her ears rang, but her mind remained locked in. Through the smoke, she spotted an RPG team setting up for another shot. She drew in a deep breath, let it out, and fired. The first man dropped. She racked the bolt, fired again, and the second went down before he could even shoulder the tube. "Nice shot, Carter," Ramirez growled between bursts. She didn't answer. Words meant nothing here. The enemy adjusted quickly, pouring more fire into their position. Bullets tore into the earth around her, snapping vines, gouging holes in the mud. A round punched into the tree, inches from her face, showering her with bark. She didn't flinch. Her scope swept again. She saw movement, 3 fighters flanking from the right. Calm, she lined up, dropped the first. Adjusted, dropped the second. The third dived behind a tree, but she was already moving, circling her reticle. When he peeked out, she was waiting. Click, boom, silence. Still, for every fighter she felled, more seemed to rise. Carter realized with a cold clarity, this wasn't a probing attack. This was a full-scale ambush. Dozens, maybe more. They wanted to wipe the team out here, in the jungle's belly, far from help. Shift right. Hayes commanded. Move, move. The team began peeling toward the thicker undergrowth, using bounding cover fire to carve a path out of the clearing. Ramirez laid down suppressive bursts, while Hayes and another SEAL lobbed grenades to break the enemy's momentum. Explosions echoed through the jungle, shockwaves bouncing between the trees. Carter rose into a crouch, rifle still up, moving in disciplined steps. She fired, shifted, fired again, her M40 kicking into her shoulder with steady rhythm. Each target she found went down. But then came the sound no sniper wanted to hear in combat, the hollow click of an empty magazine. She ejected the mag, her fingers fast, sliding in a fresh one with practiced ease. As she chambered the next round, she caught sight of Hayes waving the team onward. They had to break contact. Staying meant dying. The jungle around them burned with muzzle flashes. Shouts in a foreign tongue rang through the smoke, guttural, and savage. The enemy was confident, pressing harder, believing they had the Americans pinned. A grenade landed close, bouncing into the mud. Carter didn't think. She kicked it hard, sending it tumbling down the slope. It detonated mid-air, the blast lighting the night like lightning. Her ears screamed, but she was already back behind the scope, eyes locked, heartbeat steady. Then it happened. An explosion rocked the earth to her left, a thunderous blast that ripped apart the ground and hurled Carter into the air. She slammed down hard, the impact driving the air from her lungs. Her rifle skidded a few feet away, clattering against a root. For a moment, all she heard was ringing. The world swam in blurred green. Smoke and dust choked the air. She crawled, instincts dragging her toward the rifle. Her fingers closed on the stock, pulling it back to her chest like a lifeline. She staggered to her knees, blinking through the haze. Shapes moved ahead her teammates, fighting to push forward, pulling into the jungle's cover. Hayes shouted something, but the ringing in her ears drowned it out. Another explosion detonated between her and the team, the ground erupting in fire and dirt. The jungle seemed to fold in, cutting her off completely. Smoke swallowed everything. "Carter, fall back." Ramirez's voice crackled faintly over comms, then cut out. Static, silence. She was alone. The enemy surged forward through the smoke, their shouts closer now, their fire cutting the clearing to pieces. Carter dropped prone, rifle braced, forcing her panic down into silence. Alone or not, she still had teeth. The M40 roared again. One man fell, another, a third. She shifted, fired, shifted again. Her rifle with thunder in the jungle, her scope the executioner's eye. The ambush was theirs, but Carter had just become its nightmare. The smoke rolled like a living thing, curling low and heavy as the jungle settled into a suffocating silence. Gunfire still echoed faintly somewhere ahead, muffled by the thick vegetation and the pounding in Carter's ears. She pressed her cheek into the mud, chest heaving as the metallic taste of blood filled her mouth. Her team was gone. She forced herself to focus, blinking grit from her eyes. Her M40 was still in her hands, scratched and caked with dirt but intact. She checked it out of habit scope clear, bolt cycling smooth, mag seated. As long as the rifle lived, so did she. The comms crackled faintly, Ramirez's voice cutting through the static. "Carter, fall back. Extraction point." The words were broken, fragmented, like ghosts in the ether. Then silence again. She exhaled slowly, pushing herself upright into a crouch. Alone, in the middle of enemy territory, surrounded by fighters who believed they had sprung a perfect trap. Any lesser operator might have panicked. But Carter had been trained for this, for the isolation, for the unforgiving mathematics of survival when all odds collapsed. Her training whispered through her thoughts. Slow is smooth. Smooth is fast. Don't rush. Don't break rhythm. Her first priority was distance. The enemy had surged toward her last known position, and if she stayed here, she would be flanked and overrun in minutes. She slid her rifle strap across her shoulder and melted into the vegetation, moving low and controlled, every step deliberate. The jungle closed around her, its towering trees blotting out the sky, its vines clutching like hands. The ground was slick, every patch of mud threatening to suck her boots down. Insects screamed in the darkness, and far off, something primal shrieked from the canopy. Behind her, she heard voices, guttural, sharp, urgent. Enemy fighters, fanning through the brush, hunting the ghost they thought was cornered. Carter ducked into a shallow depression near a cluster of roots, steadying her breath as beams of flashlight cut through the smoke. One insurgent paused only 10 feet from her hiding spot, his weapon sweeping the area. Through her scope, She could see the sweat dripping down his temple, the nervous flick of his eyes. She could end him with a single squeeze. But firing now would light her position like a flare. Instead, she waited, counted his breaths, counted her own. When he turned to move on, she slipped deeper into the shadows, using the jungle itself as her shield. The patience of a sniper was not just for the shot, it was for survival. Minutes dragged into what felt like hours. The gunfire in the distance tapered off, replaced by silence, broken only by the occasional burst of shouted commands in the enemy's tongue. Carter knew what that meant. The SEALs had broken contact and pulled back toward the extraction zone. Standard protocol. If she wasn't with them, they would assume she was gone. And in a way, she was. The realization pressed against her chest like a weight. Abandoned not by choice, but by circumstance. Left behind in hostile jungle, cut off from friendly lines. She would have to fight her way back, or not at all. Carter crouched near a ridge, pulling out her small tactical map. She oriented it quickly north, was extraction, but the ridges between here and there were crawling with fighters. Charging straight through was suicide. She would need to circle wide, pick paths of least resistance, and use her rifle to thin out pursuers when necessary. Her stomach tightened, but not from fear. It was the grim clarity of a sniper alone, her purpose distilled into a single truth: survive and make every bullet count. As she began her crawl along the ridgeline, the jungle came alive again. Enemy voices echoed nearby, the crackle of radios mixing with the crunch of boots in wet soil. They were sweeping, methodical, relentless. One squad appeared below her, 6 men moving in formation, weapons raised. Carter flattened against the earth, her heart steady, her eyes fixed behind her scope. She lined up the lead man. A deep inhale, a slow exhale. Crack. The shot was perfect. The lead man dropped, and before the others registered, Carter cycled the bolt, shifted, and fired again. Another fighter fell, throat blossoming red. Panic rippled through the squad. They fired blindly into the trees, shouting, scattering. Carter was already moving, crawling along the ridge, flanking her own kill zone. A third shot split the night. A fourth. The survivors broke and ran, their ambush unraveling. Alone, one sniper had turned their numbers into chaos. But victory carried no comfort. With every shot, she risked drawing more attention. She reloaded, slid further into the dense brush, and let the jungle swallow her once more. Hours bled away as she moved deeper, using terrain and shadow to vanish between patrols. She drank sparingly from her canteen, the water metallic but life-giving. Sweat plastered her uniform to her skin, and her muscles ached from constant tension. She thought of her team, somewhere out there pushing toward safety, believing she was gone. The idea didn't sting it, steadied her. Better they thought her dead than risk their lives searching. She was on her own now, and that was enough. By the time dawn's pale light began to filter through the canopy, Carter had carved herself a new rhythm. Move, pause, listen, watch, fire only when necessary. Her rifle was more than a weapon, it was her companion, her voice, her heartbeat in the silence. The jungle had tried to swallow her, but with every step, every trigger squeeze, she made it bleed. And though she was alone, the battle was only beginning. The jungle belonged to them, or at least, that's what the enemy believed. They moved in squads now, their chatter sharp, purposeful, confident. They had caught the Americans in their net, driven them off, and assumed the straggler would be finished soon. A lone operator couldn't survive the jungle's grip, not against their numbers. They didn't know Riley Carter. She lay belly down on a bed of damp leaves, the stock of her M40 snug against her shoulder, her face painted with mud and sweat. Through her scope, The jungle was no longer chaos, but geometry. Lines of sight, fields of fire, concealment routes. She wasn't a lost soldier anymore. She was a ghost with steel teeth. A squad of 8 moved cautiously along a game trail 20 meters below her ridge. They thought themselves cautious intervals between men, weapons up, eyes scanning the brush. But they moved too loud, too bunched. Carter watched them, heart steady, breaths slow. Her finger found the trigger. The lead man's head erupted in a spray of crimson. Before his body hit the ground, Carter shifted, fired again. A second dropped, screaming, clutching his chest. Panic bloomed instantly. The survivors scattered, firing wild into the undergrowth, shouting her position to the canopy. She didn't give them a target. She slid backward into the brush, crawling low, moving 10 feet to the left, then settling into a new firing pocket. The M40 barked again. Another fighter spun and fell. By the time the survivors scrambled behind cover, 3 of their squad mates lay dead, and the jungle was silent, except for their frantic voices. Carter pulled back farther, already ghosting away before they could coordinate. She wasn't running. She was hunting. For hours, the pattern repeated. Patrols pushed through the thick green, searching, sweeping, growing bolder in numbers. And Carter whittled them down, one by one, squad by squad. She never stayed in one place after firing. Each shot was a dagger in the dark. Each squad dissolved into chaos at the crack of her rifle. The insurgents adapted, but only halfway. They spread wider, moved slower, started firing into likely sniper hides. It didn't matter. Carter's patience was unmatched. She waited until they exposed themselves, until the nervous twitch of a barrel gave away a position. Then came the calm squeeze, the sharp crack, the collapse of another body. It was psychological warfare now. Every man who entered the jungle began to look over his shoulder. Every shadow, every rustle of leaves could hide the silent American ghost. Carter wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was turning their ambush inside out. By nightfall, she had killed at least a dozen. She had stopped counting after the 7th body. Numbers didn't matter. What mattered was control. And the jungle was shifting. The fighters no longer moved with confidence. They huddled, whispered, lit torches that only betrayed their positions. They were afraid of the darkness. Carter embraced it. She set snares with tripwires, scavenged from abandoned gear, lacing them between roots and vines. She smeared mud across her rifle's barrel to dull the shine, strapped leaves across her shoulders to break her outline. She became indistinguishable from the earth itself. The first fighter to trip one of her snares screamed as sharpened bamboo spikes tore into his leg. The scream carried through the jungle, followed by confused shouting. Carter didn't move. She watched, waited, until one of the rescuers exposed himself in panic. Her shot dropped him instantly. The jungle fell quiet again, their fear thick as the humidity. By midnight, Carter found herself near a ridge overlooking an old supply trail. She settled into a sniper's nest beneath a fallen log, her rifle steady against the bark. Her eyes scanned the trail below. A large group appeared, 15, maybe more. Heavier weapons this time. 2 machine guns, RPG tubes slung over shoulders. A hunting party meant for her. She didn't flinch. She studied them like a chessboard. Machine gunners first, they could pin her down. RPG gunners second, they could flush her from cover. Leaders third, they held the squad together. She drew in a breath, exhaled, crack. The first machine gunner went down. Panic. Shouts. Her bolt racked, chambered, crack. The second folded backward, his weapon clattering uselessly. Chaos erupted. Fighters dove for cover, firing wildly into the ridge. Leaves shredded, bark exploded, But Carter stayed low, calm, her eye never leaving the scope. The RPG gunner popped his head above a log, shoulder lifting the tube. Crack! His skull snapped back, the rocket tumbling harmlessly away. The squad broke, their coordination collapsing. Some fired blindly, others scrambled into the underbrush. Carter shifted again, picked off another. The jungle howled with gunfire, but only one side's shots landed with deadly precision. By the time the survivors fled, dragging bodies with them, 6 more lay dead in the mud. Hours bled together. Carter had become something else entirely. Predator, shadow, executioner. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. She napped in 5-minute bursts, rifle always in her grip, senses sharp even in half-dreams. She drank sparingly, ate nothing, letting adrenaline feed her body. Her thoughts narrowed into instinct. Her world reduced to 3 absolutes: rifle, jungle, enemy. And yet, beneath the steel, the human heart still beat. Between engagements, when the jungle grew still, Carter thought of her team. Hayes, Ramirez, the others. They were out there, maybe boarding a chopper by now, believing she was gone. She imagined their faces when they'd hear the truth, if she made it out. That hope wasn't weakness. It was fuel. By the second night, the enemy was desperate. Carter overheard their radio chatter as she moved closer to a fallen squad's position. The words were foreign, but tone was universal. Fear, frustration, disbelief. They had thrown platoons at one woman, and she was dismantling them piece by piece. She didn't need to understand the language to know what they were saying. To them, she wasn't a soldier anymore. She was a ghost. A phantom in the green hell. It picked men off one by one. And ghosts don't retreat. Carter crouched in a ravine, water rushing shallow around her boots. Above, another squad moved along the edge, silhouetted against moonlight slicing through the canopy. She lined up the lead man. Her finger tightened. Then she stopped. Firing here would give her position away in an instant. And she had something better in mind. She waited until the squad passed, then moved with the water, silent as the current. She climbed the ravine's edge 50 meters behind them, then circled wide to set up ahead on the trail. When the squad re-emerged, Carter was waiting in perfect concealment, her rifle steady. The first man dropped before he saw her. The second barely turned before he collapsed. By the time the last fighter realized what had happened, Carter was already gone. Morning light cut through the canopy again, painting the jungle in streaks of gold. Carter sat in the fork of a massive tree, her rifle across her lap, her body still, her eyes burning with exhaustion, but sharp with focus. She had survived 2 nights, fought through dozens, and left the jungle littered with bodies. Alone, she had dismantled an ambush designed to annihilate a SEAL team. And yet, she knew this wasn't the end. She had bought herself time, tilted the scales, but extraction was still miles away. And the enemy wasn't going to quit. They were hunting her harder than ever now, not just out of orders, but out of fear and pride. Carter checked her mag. Only a handful of rounds left. She smiled faintly, a humorless curl of her lips. That would be enough. Because she wasn't running anymore. She was making the jungle hers. And anyone who stepped into it would pay the price. The jungle at night was alive with whispers. Not voices, though. Carter still heard those sometimes, echoing faintly in her ringing ears, but whispers of insects, of leaves shifting under a breeze, of animals calling out in the darkness. Every sound was amplified, sharpened, and to the hunted ear, every one of them might have been a bootstep, a rifle bolt, a man closing in. Carter sat pressed into the curve of a massive tree root, knees drawn up, her M40 balanced across them. Her eyes fought against the fatigue that pressed heavier with every minute. She hadn't slept in 2 days. Her limbs were weighted with exhaustion, her thoughts flickering between sharp clarity and the fog of dreams. But every time her head dipped, every time her eyelids dragged shut, the sound of something moving nearby would snap her awake. The enemy wasn't gone. They were out there, somewhere in the dark, searching. And as long as they hunted, she could not rest. She checked her gear with hands that trembled only slightly. 3 full mags left. 1/2. A single smoke grenade. Her knife, caked with dirt. Canteen nearly dry. No food. The hunger gnawed, but she ignored it. Hunger could wait. What couldn't wait was water, and she tilted the canteen back for one last swallow, grimacing at the metallic taste. Priorities, she reminded herself, silently. Hydration, movement, concealment. Fire only when you must. It wasn't just training keeping her anchored. It was instinct now, fused into every nerve. Near midnight, the jungle shifted again. Distant voices. She froze, lowering herself into the mud, ears straining. The voices drew closer, maybe 10 or 12 men, moving slow, calling to each other softly. A sweep line. Her pulse quickened, but not with panic. She mapped their approach in her mind. They were spreading too thin, leaving gaps between them. They thought their numbers gave them security. But numbers meant noise, and noise was weakness in the jungle. Carter slithered onto her stomach, pressing into a shallow rut in the earth. Through her scope, she caught sight of a fighter breaking through the brush, flashlight beam cutting in jerks across the foliage. She didn't fire. Not yet. She let him pass, then another. She waited until the sweep line curved, until 2 men lingered near the rut. One crouched, muttering in frustration. The other turned his back to adjust his radio. Crack! The standing man dropped. The crouching man spun in shock, rifle rising too late. Crack! His head snapped back. The jungle erupted with shouts, men firing wildly into the dark. Carter rolled, slid behind the root, and crawled downslope into thicker brush. She was gone before they even found the bodies. The sweep collapsed into chaos. Orders barked, overlapping with panicked cries. Carter moved low and fast, circling them, her boots silent in the mud. When she reached a new vantage, she dropped prone, lifted the rifle, and picked off another straggler. 3 shots. 3 dead. And a dozen more terrified of shadows. By 2 in the morning, the hunt had turned frantic. The enemy fired into empty trees, into rustling bushes, wasting ammunition in fear. Carter watched from a perch in the crook of a banyan tree, her face painted with mud, her breathing controlled. Her stomach twisted from hunger, her throat raw from thirst, but she pushed it down. Fatigue clawed at her, dragging at her focus, but she denied it. She had learned long ago that survival wasn't about strength. It was about will. The body quit first. The mind decided whether you followed. And she wasn't done yet. At 3, the rain came. A torrential downpour that turned the jungle into a roaring river of mud and water. Visibility dropped to nothing. The enemy cursed and stumbled through the downpour, their flashlights useless against sheets of water. Carter used it. She crawled through the muck, silent, invisible, her rifle wrapped in cloth to shield it from the worst of the rain. She slid down into a gully where 2 fighters had taken shelter under a crude tarp. Their weapons leaned against a rock, their bodies hunched, smoking cigarettes to stay awake. She crept closer, every muscle coiled. Her knife slid from its sheath. The first never saw her. One hand over his mouth, one slice across the throat. Silent, swift. The second turned too late. She drove the blade into his side, twisting, holding until his thrashing stilled. She lowered him gently into the mud, eyes empty, heart cold. She didn't like the knife. It was too personal. But tonight, It was necessary. Ammunition had to be preserved, and fear had to be spread. By dawn, they would find the bodies and wonder how close she had been, how easily she had slipped into their camp. The ghost had teeth. As the rain eased near dawn, Carter crawled back to higher ground. Her whole body shook now, not from fear, but from depletion. Her muscles ached, her stomach cramped from emptiness, her throat cracked from thirst. She leaned against a tree, closing her eyes for a moment. Just a moment. But the jungle allowed no peace. Gunfire cracked in the distance, short bursts. A squad probing again. Carter forced her eyes open, biting the inside of her cheek until the pain cleared her haze. She settled behind her rifle again, the stock firm against her shoulder, her eye steady in the scope. Through the glass, the jungle became simple. Lines, targets, opportunity. Her world shrank. The exhaustion fell away. There was only the shot. Crack. One man fell. Crack. Another. The survivors scattered, their shouts thin against the roar of insects waking with the sun. Carter exhaled, steady. The night had taken everything from her: sleep, strength, comfort. She was running on nothing, but will now the steel thread discipline that kept seals alive when logic said they should be dead. Her rifle was nearly empty. Her canteen dry. Her body screaming for rest. But she was still here. The jungle hadn't taken her. The enemy hadn't broken her. And as the pale gray of morning stretched through the canopy, Chief Petty Officer Riley Carter knew she had one final push to make. The extraction point was close. She could feel it in her bones. All she had to do was survive one more day. Dawn crept into the jungle like smoke, pale shafts of light piercing the canopy, turning every drifting mist into ghostly veils. Chief Petty Officer Riley Carter crouched low at the base of a banyan tree, her rifle resting against her knee, her chest heaving with shallow breaths. Her body was broken down to the essentials. Muscles screamed with every movement. Her lips were split from thirst, and her hands trembled from fatigue. Her uniform was torn, bloodied, caked with mud, but her eyes, bloodshot, hollow, unblinking, still burned with the fire of survival. The extraction point was close. Just one more ridge, one more stretch of hostile ground. She adjusted her pack, checked her magazines. One full, one half, 4 rounds loose. Barely enough, but enough. She started forward, every step a battle against the weight dragging her down. The jungle resisted her passage, vines clawing at her arms, roots trying to trip her. She pushed through, her will carrying her body when nothing else could. Then came the sound, a low hump 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 rolling through the trees. Helicopter blades. Her heart surged. Extraction. She quickened her pace, moving downslope, crashing through brush now, discipline pushed aside by urgency. The canopy thinned, revealing a clearing where the Black Hawk hovered, its rotors chopping the air, its side gunners scanning for threats. But so were the enemy. From the far tree line, fighters burst forward, rifles raised, shouting war cries as they unleashed fire toward the landing zone. Muzzle flashes flared like lightning across the dark green. The bird opened up, its door guns ripping through the jungle, but the insurgents kept coming, emboldened by sheer numbers. Carter dropped prone at the edge of the clearing, her M40 sliding into position almost by instinct. Her world narrowed to the scope. Crack. A gunman fell. Crack. Another dropped mid-sprint, his AK tumbling from his grip. She shifted, fired, shifted again. Her rifle sang its deadly rhythm, cutting through the chaos with surgical precision. Every shot cleared another path toward survival. Carter. A voice shouted faintly through her earpiece. Hayes, you're alive, get to the bird. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Words were wasted breath. She kept firing, her rifle's report the only language she needed. The insurgents focused on her now, recognizing the phantom that had haunted their nights. Bullets tore into the earth around her, snapping vines, churning mud. She rolled, shifted positions, fired again. Her rifle was thunder, and the jungle shuddered at each strike. But her mag ran dry with a hollow click. She ejected it, jammed in her last full mag, chambered around, and went back to work. The Black Hawk began to descend, its rotors flattening the clearing into chaos. A rope dropped, seals sliding down, laying down fire to cover her. Carter knew this was her moment. She rose from the mud, sprinted forward, her rifle cradled tight, weaving through gunfire. Her legs screamed, her lungs burned, but she didn't slow. A fighter broke through the brush ahead, rifle raised. Carter fired without hesitation, dropping him mid-step. Another lunged from the side. She swung her stock into his jaw, shattering bone, then shoved him aside and kept moving. She was 30 feet from the rope when another explosion tore the clearing, flinging dirt and smoke into the air. Carter hit the ground hard, her ears ringing, her vision blurring. Through the haze, figures advanced half a dozen, maybe more. She tried to raise her rifle, but her hands shook, her body finally giving in. And then Ramirez was there. The big SEAL hauled her up by her vest, dragging her toward the rope. "Got you, Carter. Time to go home." She barely registered it, her vision tunneling. She felt the rope press into her hands, felt herself pulled upward as the Black Hawk lifted, the jungle shrinking below. Below, the enemy scattered as the helicopter's guns raked the tree line, cutting them down in droves. The jungle that had almost consumed her burned with fire and steel. Carter clung to the rope, swaying in the rotor wash, her body numb, her rifle still slung across her back like a second spine. The flight back was a blur. Hayes gripped her shoulder, shouting something she couldn't hear. Ramirez pressed a canteen to her lips, forcing water down her throat. The medics worked over her cuts and bruises, their hands brisk and efficient. But all she could think of was the jungle, the shadows, the patrols, the endless night of hunting and being hunted. It lingered in her mind like smoke, clinging even as the rotors carried her away. When they landed at base, the team surrounded her. Relief, disbelief, pride, it was all there in their faces. Hayes met her eyes, and for a moment, the usually stoic commander let a smile crack through. "You made it," he said simply. "Hell of a thing, Carter." She didn't smile. She only nodded, her face pale, eyes hard. Because she hadn't just made it. She had fought, clawed, endured when everything said she should have been dead. She had turned an ambush into a massacre, had become the ghost of the jungle, feared by men who thought they owned it. Weeks later, after debriefs and medical checks, the story spread. A SEAL sniper, left behind in the jungle, had survived alone against overwhelming odds. Her M40 had spoken death into the green hell, and her will had carried her through when nothing else could. The official reports called it extraordinary resilience under hostile conditions. The teams whispered a different version, the ghost sniper, the woman who turned the enemy's jungle into their graveyard. Carter herself said little. She didn't chase the legend, didn't bask in it. She carried the weight quietly, as she always had. Her rifle was cleaned, stowed, ready for the next mission. And sometimes, in the quiet of the barracks, she closed her eyes and heard the jungle again. The rain, the gunfire, the whispers. She remembered being left behind. And she remembered what it took to come back.